And she joins me now. Good afternoon to you. Thanks so much for talking to us today. So let's start with there are various different elements at play here, aren't there? One of which is this rising cost of energy. Tell us just how bad it could get. What difference could we be seeing on our energy bills next year?
So, as you said, there's a big rise in energy prices down the line coming in April next year when the energy price cap rises, and on average that'll be about £1,200 per household. But over the course of the year, that is. But the other thing to bear in mind is that that's going to fall disproportionately on the lowest income households, in part because they are more likely to spend a higher share of their income on energy. So at the moment, the lowest income households spend around 8.5% of their income on energy, and that's set to rise to about 12%. So that's a big living standards hit coming down the line next year.
So what could be done about that? Could the government introduce a lower increase to the energy price cap, or could they provide support to some of those poorer families? What are the options that the government could introduce?
Yeah, so the government has a range of options, and one option would be to support the lowest income households directly, for example, through a rise in universal credit. Now, it's a bit unlikely that the government will choose to go down that route, given that they've just taken away the £20 a week uplift to universal credit that they introduced during the pandemic. But there are options for them to directly support energy costs for households. So one option would be to kind of directly address the planned rise in the energy price cap. So, for example, subsidising energy companies so that they don't have to increase their prices for households. And that could be kind of a temporary measure while we ride out the storm of the energy price increase if it proves to be temporary. And then they could either do that for everyone, or again, that could be targeted towards the lowest income households, for example, those in receipt of universal credit, which would be a bit more administratively burdensome, but it would also kind of reduce the overall cost to the government. So there are a range of options, but I think the main thing is to give some support to households, especially those on the lowest incomes, so that the cost of living squeeze that's set to come over the next year doesn't bite quite so hard.
Well, yes, and the government does say that it's put in £2.4 billion to support families, and they've also increased universal credit to working households, haven't they? So they would say that they're doing their bit.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's, even with the support that the government has introduced, and it's obviously, really welcome that they've given the support to working households, but at the same time, there are plenty of households where they've had that £20 a week uplift taken away, and they've not got that kind of increase that working households have benefited from. So, for example, people where no one's in work, for example, because they've got a long-term health condition or a very young child, and prices are already rising. The inflation data for November showed that prices are rising at the fastest rate in a decade. So households are really facing a squeeze, and pay packets are struggling to keep up. And with not just the energy price rise coming in April, but also the rise in national insurance that the government is introducing to kind of pay for extra health and social care spending, there's a lot of pressures on household budgets coming down the line that maybe the government, didn't realise was going to be happening earlier in the year. So there is likely to be more support needed, again, particularly for those on lower incomes who are likely to be hit hardest.
Well, that's right, a rise of 1.25% in national insurance contributions from April. But given that scenario that you've painted of stagnant wages and also of energy price rises, is that policy likely to prove controversial politically, do you think?
It could do. I mean, it's worth saying that the rise in the national insurance threshold, while it's a kind of a big hit to household income, it does disproportionately fall on higher income households. So it's kind of, it's in that sense at least, it's kind of not as bad as it could have been. But I think with so many kind of price rises and wages and pay packets struggling to keep up over the next year, I think the main thing is just for the government to be putting in support where it's needed. I think the main thing is this rise in energy prices. That's where the biggest squeeze to household incomes is going to be coming from in the next few months.
And a quick word on inflation. Do we need to worry about that as well?
Well, yes. I mean, as I said earlier, unfortunately, the inflation is already at its highest level in a decade. Prices are already rising and putting a squeeze on household incomes. And when we look at the forecasts from the Bank of England and others, that's set to continue at least into the first half of next year, in part because of those energy price rises feeding in. And our research shows that with the price rises we're expecting and with kind of wages struggling to keep up, wages in terms of kind of how much you can actually buy with what you earn are set to be no higher by the end of next year than they are now. So that's a very broad-based hit to living standards for lots of households.
OK, well, Hannah Slaughter, thanks for talking us through them. We appreciate your time. Thank you.